Hi, I'm Gary Bauer with American Values Action in Washington, D.C. And today I wanted to share a few thoughts with you about the things that we're seeing in some of America's cities. I'm sure you're as disturbed as I am by the images coming out of Milwaukee recently, rioting after a policeman shot and killed an armed petty criminal. But it's not just Milwaukee. A couple weekends ago, 52 people were shot in Chicago. There's been rioting in cities like Baltimore. We're seeing more and more examples of a breakdown of law and order and of the kind of rules of society that we have to have. Why is this happening? What's the explanation for it? Some commentators have suggested it's evidence of racism, or somehow it's the fault of Republicans or conservatives. All kinds of weird things are putting out there. And so I wanted to remind you today about one basic fact that's getting almost no attention. Almost every American city of any significant size is run by the Democrats and progressives, almost across the board. And I don't mean that these cities have been run by progressives and socialists and Democrats for the last few months or the last few years. No, most of these cities have been in the hands of the Democratic Party for decades. In many big cities, there is not one Republican or one conservative on city councils of those big cities. Not only has the government in America's big cities been in the hands of the liberals, so is almost everything else. The schools in these cities are often controlled by big labor unions, teacher unions. And so ideas that conservatives come up with to reform those schools so that minority children can get a good education are rejected because the teacher unions oppose the ideas. What about the American family, and particularly families in the inner cities? We've seen a complete breakdown of the inner city family, particularly in the African American community. Large numbers of African American boys and girls are being raised in households without fathers. And of course, it's been the left. It's been progressives. It's been the social engineers on that side of the political spectrum that have mocked the family unit, said that fathers aren't important, who've laughed at the idea that marriage ought to be between a man and a woman and that children ought to have mothers and fathers. It's been conservatives and Christians that have argued that in a society with no fathers and no husbands, you inevitably will have a breakdown of order. What about something even more basic than that? What about reliable standards of right and wrong? You know, there are several progressive groups whose only purpose for existing is to go all over America and find any replication of the Ten Commandments. That's right, you heard me correctly. There are groups who want to take down copies of the Ten Commandments anytime they find them on public property, hanging in a school in the hallway, on a sculpture on the front lawn of the courthouse. And of course, you remember the Ten Commandments. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not steal. We're living in a society that is breaking down because young people and adults all too often don't follow the Ten Commandments. We're seeing corruption on Wall Street, in Washington, D.C., and yes, a breakdown of reliable standards of right and wrong in our schools and in our neighborhoods. So on issue after issue, on debate after debate, America's urban inner cities are an example of what happens when the left is in control and when the traditional ideas put forth by conservatives are mocked and ignored. Maybe if we want to improve our cities, maybe we should think about getting back to the basics of Judeo-Christian civilization. Just a thought from Gary Bauer of American Values Action here in Washington, D.C.